All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a presentation on the harms of pornography. My name is Ben Miller, and I am the Digital Strategies Coordinator here at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Here at NCOSE, we are all about defending human dignity and opposing sexual exploitation. And pornography obviously being a major part of that equation. We are also celebrating National White Ribbon Against Pornography Week, where people across the countries, both individuals and groups, are uniting together to raise awareness about the harms of pornography and fight back. If you'd like to learn more about WRAP Week and join in on some of the activities that we have going on this week, feel free to visit our website after the webinar at endsexualexploitation.org/WRAP. So today, like I mentioned, we are talking about the harms of pornography. Now, at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, we have an ongoing campaign titled Pornography, a Public Health Crisis. And what we are doing is we are trying to raise awareness that pornography is a public health issue that is becoming more and more serious on a national level and that needs to be addressed on this national level. So what exactly is a public health crisis? A public health crisis is a serious, harmful problem that affects individuals or groups beyond their capacity alone to correct. Like I said, pornography is a national issue, and it's one that is growing. And as you'll see throughout this webinar, it's one that's causing a lot of problems. One thing that I want to raise awareness about is that pornography is not an issue that only affects weak-willed people. It is not simply something that can be overcome by white-knuckling your way through it. This is a serious public health issue, and we must address it as such. And after the webinar, you can visit our campaign page for Pornography, a Public Health Crisis at endsexualexploitation.org/public health. So to begin, we need to talk about the pervasiveness of pornography today. Pornography is absolutely everywhere. Quick question, can all of you hear me okay? If you can, hit the raise hand button that you'll see down below. Just want to make sure that some of the audio problems people are having aren't on my end and or rather might be on your end. Awesome, thanks. Good, looks good. Thank you for raising your hand, everyone. All right, so continuing forward, pornography is pervasive. It is absolutely everywhere in our society today. And there's three areas with respect to the pervasiveness of pornography that I want to address in particular. First and foremost, we are seeing a young age of first exposure to pornography. A study of university students found that 93% of boys and 62% of girls had seen internet pornography during adolescence. We hear constant reports here at NCOSE of children at young ages being exposed to internet pornography because it is so easy to access and you simply stumble upon it. In many ways, I say pornography is more easy to find than it is to avoid. It's so easy to come across today, you actually have to put effort in to avoid it. And that is a serious problem. In addition to that, not only are people being exposed to it, but once they're exposed to it, they also start to actively seek it out. 64% of people ages 13 to 24 actively seek out pornography weekly or more. And in addition to that, this is one area in particular that I always stress when talking about pornography. This is an issue that affects both genders. And we're seeing it especially becoming an issue amongst young women today more often. So teenage girls and young women are significantly more likely to actively seek out porn than women 25 years old and above. Like I said at the beginning of this presentation, pornography is becoming an issue that is increasing in our society, and it's affecting both men and women. And it's as a result, we need to make sure that we're talking about it and talking about the harms of pornography. So now we're going to get a bit nerdy here. We're going to talk about the science behind pornography and pornography addiction. So since 2009, there have been 40 major studies that have revealed negative and detrimental impacts on the brain from pornography usage. Pornography stimulates the brain and it hijacks the brain's dopamine system. Now, dopamine has many functions, which include measuring reward value, motivation, learning and memory, and sexual desire. And dopamine dysregulation is a major hallmark of all addictions, including porn addiction. Now, what happens in the brain when you view pornography? Pornography use produces unnaturally high, prolonged dopamine levels. So what happens is when you have something novel and exciting appear in your life, say for example, somebody puts a delicious looking chocolate cake in front of you, your brain gets a shot of dopamine. And eventually over time, as your dopamine levels begin to fall back down, the thrill and excitement of that chocolate cake begins to fade. But with internet pornography, we're seeing a new phenomenon. Pornography has near infinite novelty. There's always a new video to click, a new image to be seen. And the result is that we are seeing constant spikes of dopamine. As soon as that dopamine starts to fall back down, it shoots back up again instantly as we go on to new images and new videos. And so pornography use is producing that unnaturally high level of dopamine over prolonged periods of time, rather than the typical shot of dopamine and then fall back down. Now, what is the result of this? The result is that we're seeing actual structural changes in the brain. These abnormally high dopamine levels result in the brain beginning to desensitize itself to normal dopamine. So a 2014 study found that increased pornography use is linked to decreased brain matter in the regions of the brain associated with motivation and decision making. Like I mentioned before, dopamine plays a critical role in our motivation and in our decision making. And then porn use also contributed to impaired impulse control and desensitization to sexual reward. So again, as the brain gets used to these high unnatural levels of dopamine, it no longer correctly responds to the normal natural levels of dopamine. The result being that when people who have exposure to internet pornography are again faced with a sexual urge, they need that strong hit of pornography again, they lose their impulse control, so on and so forth. And so like I mentioned at the very beginning, this is a public health issue. This isn't simply an issue of people not having a strong enough will to overcome, and it's not an issue through which people can simply white knuckle their way to recovery. This is an issue in which the brain's chemical balance and the brain's structure is actually being changed as a result of pornography use, and the result is unnatural chemical imbalance in the brain, and therefore the brain becoming desensitized to normal natural levels of dopamine. So what is the result? The World Health Organization has officially defined what we call compulsive sexual behavior disorder. Now, the World Health Organization definition doesn't list pornography specifically, but what we see in pornography is exactly what we find in compulsive sexual behavior disorder, that being a persistent pattern of failure to control intense, repetitive sexual impulses or urges, resulting in repetitive sexual behavior. Symptoms may include repetitive sexual activities becoming a central focus of the person's life, to the point of neglecting health and personal care or other interests, activities, and responsibilities. Again, like I mentioned, the way that pornography works is that because the way in which pornography always has new novel experiences with the way that we have internet streaming of pornography and always having a new video to click, we're faced with our brain becoming used to unnaturally high levels of dopamine. And so, again, because we are used to unnaturally high levels of dopamine, our brain doesn't properly respond to natural levels of dopamine. The result being we neglect health, personal care, other interests or activities because they don't give us the same rush that pornography does. And then what do we see coming from this? Well, the result is escalation of behavior. So a 2015 MRI study from Cambridge found that compulsive sexual behavior is characterized by novelty-seeking, conditioning, and habituation to sexual stimuli in males, meaning users need more extreme content over time in order to achieve the same level of arousal. So like I mentioned, dopamine works on novelty. And when your brain becomes desensitized to the natural levels of dopamine, the brain is going to ask for more and more extreme content, more novelty, in order to get that same level of arousal, in order to give you that dopamine rush. And so now we're beginning to see a disturbing trend with respect to sexuality. Early sexual experiences can wire sexual rewards to once repulsive cues. So there was an interesting study in which one researcher sprayed sexually receptive female rats with cadaverine, which is the odor of decaying flesh, which naturally repulses rats, and then placed those female rats in a cage with young virgin males. They mated. Days later, placed in an environment with both unscented and cadaverine-scented females, the ex-virgin males mated indiscriminately with both. However, males with previous sexual experience wouldn't go near the cadaverine-soaked females. What this study is showing us, and we have found that a rat's brain actually works very similar to a human brain with respect to these sexual impulses, is that things that we would normally be repulsed by become normalized. Our sexuality can become warped to things that we would once consider repulsive, but now instead find completely normalized. And this again is a result of the way in which pornography is chemically changing our brain and changing what kind of things we need in order to achieve that dopamine rush of arousal. And so here's one young man's story. This was by a boy who is 20 years old, and he reflected, "I gradually became desensitized and escalated to more extreme, brutal, and degrading videos. That hurts me even more because I am a sensitive and empathetic person. I would never want anyone to suffer, especially not girls or young women in real life. It is devastating and cruel to see how you get accustomed to practices you would naturally find disgusting and inhumane." So again, like I mentioned, as the brain begins to hijack, as pornography begins to hijack the brain's reward system, the result is this downslide into more extreme content in order to achieve the same level of arousal and dopamine rush. But what exactly do we mean by more extreme content? Pornography shapes the user's sexual template around themes of degradation, unclear consent, and violence. To put it simply, pornography lies. It says women are tools to be used and men are inevitable predators. And the reality is that we deserve better. Pornography is teaching us an unhealthy sexuality. As our brain gets hijacked, our reward system goes completely haywire. Plain vanilla sex is no longer enough for us. Instead, we begin turning towards content which is increasingly aggressive, violent, and degrading. And that's exactly what we see in pornography. An analysis of the 50 most popular pornographic videos, those bought and rented the most, found that 88% of scenes contained physical violence and 49% contained verbal aggression. In addition, not only did those scenes show physical violence and verbal aggression, but it also showed that women enjoy that violence. 87% of aggressive acts were perpetrated against women, and 95% of their responses were either neutral or expressions of pleasure. So what pornography is giving us is a sexuality that is violent, aggressive, and that these women enjoyed the violence, which is absolutely false. Now, pornography shows these women enjoying it, but we always need to keep in mind that that's not what's actually real. We live in an era of intense video editing and Photoshop, and so while we may see women on screen showing these expressions of neutrality or even pleasure, the actual women behind it who were in the filming of these videos had to undergo extreme exploitation and violence. And we have many stories of women who were gravely hurt as a result of being in the pornography industry. But of course, all of the pain and hurt gets edited out, and all that we're left with is the fake reality of pleasure when the real reality of pain is completely wiped away. So pornography is hijacking our brain. It's addicting us to increasingly violent pornography. And then studies suggest we are more likely to actually commit sexual acts of aggression. So a 2015 meta-analysis of 22 studies from 7 countries found that internationally, the consumption of pornography was significantly associated with increases in verbal and physical aggression among males and females alike. And in addition to that, a meta-analysis of 46 studies reported that the effects of exposure to pornographic material are clear and consistent, and puts one at increased risk for committing sexual offenses and accepting rape myths. So why exactly is it the case that as we view violent pornography, people are now more likely to commit actual physical acts of aggression in their own life? In order to answer this question, we turn to what's called cognitive scripts theory, or CST. Now, what CST states is that media provides a heuristic learning model outlining 1, what should or should not be happening, 2, how people should or should not behave in response to what is or is not happening, and 3, what the outcomes of a particular course of action should be. Put simply, what this means with respect to pornography is pornography users use pornography scripts to navigate real-world sexual experiences. Pornography is not simply fantasy, it is an easily accessible template for actual sexual behavior. Today, pornography normalizes sexual violence. It serves as a form of sex education in which people learn the sexual script of pornography. And then when people go out into their own sex lives, they commit sexual violence thinking that it's normal. And not only do they think it's normal, but as I mentioned in that study before, they also think that women enjoy violence, which is completely false. And so pornography is teaching us a completely unhealthy form of sexuality built around sexual violence and abuse. As I mentioned before, we live in an era of Photoshop and video editing. What we see on screen in pornography is plastic. It is not reality. It is simply fake Photoshop, fake photo editing. And in addition to that, what we see is pornography setting unrealistic expectations of beauty and of sexuality. And so when we have a culture built on beauty expectations, sexual exploitations that are set by pornography to these unrealistic standards, we see negative body image. So a 2015 study found male frequent pornography use is linked to body image insecurity regarding masculinity and body fat, and to increased anxiety in romantic relationships. Also, with respect to women, as a result of viewing pornography, women reported lowered body image, body type criticism from their partners, and increased pressure to perform acts seen in pornographic films. So pornography is teaching us this warped sexuality, setting unreal expectations. The result is negative body image. In addition to that, we see porn-induced erectile dysfunction. So a recent study found sexually active young males aged 16 to 21, about 26.4% of them exhibited problems with erectile function. Now, this did not specifically look at pornography, but if we look at studies done before the advent of internet pornography, we find that ED rates for young men under 40 were between 2 to 5%. So with the advent of internet pornography and access to these constant dopamine hits of sexuality, warped sexual expectations, the result is porn-induced erectile dysfunction. We have seen massive skyrocket in ED rates among young men. And we also see this being self-reported by a lot of these young men. So Gabe Deem, who is the founder of an anti-pornography organization, Reboot Nation, talked a bit about his own experience with ED, saying, "How could I possibly have erectile dysfunction? I was only 23 and physically healthy. I went searching and found long threads of guys saying they thought porn had caused their ED. Unbelievable, but it turns out it potentially had for me too. It took me 9 months to recover normal sexual function." So again, as I mentioned, as pornography is feeding us this unrealistic expectation of sexuality in which we begin to prefer pixels over real-life sexual partners, we see an increase in erectile dysfunction in young males. We also see an increase in risky sexual behaviors. So pornography use among adult males in America is associated with increased engagement in sexual behaviors that increase the risk of STIs. So what exactly are these risky sexual behaviors? Well, internet pornography consumption has been positively associated with having sex with multiple partners, engaging in paid sex, and having extramarital sex. So as I mentioned, with respect to the brain science of pornography, our brain is always seeking out novelty. And so when seeking out that novelty and it bleeds into one's own sex life, we see these risky sexual behaviors, such as sex with multiple partners, engaging in paid sex, and having extramarital sex increasing. And then sadly, we get to a situation in which pornography no longer is enough. So an analysis of 101 sex buyers compared to 100 men who did not buy sex found that sex buyers used pornography more often than non-sex buyers, used more types of pornography, and reported that their sexual preferences changed so that they sought more violent and risky forms of sexuality. And this is exactly what we would expect in a situation in which someone's dopamine system has been hijacked by pornography and they're constantly seeking out that new novel image or video. So we see this perfect path from pornography to compulsive sexual behavior as pornography hijacks our brain's dopamine reward system. And then as a result of that compulsive sexual behavior, moving towards risky forms of sexuality, such as being a buyer of sex in the commercial sex industry, which leads to increased demand for commercial sex. And when there is high demand for commercial sex, pimps and traffickers recruit more women to supply it. And as we know here at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, these women aren't being recruited willfully, they're often being coerced and exploited into the commercial sex industry. So to put a quick summary on the harms of pornography, pornography is everywhere. Pornography exposure is occurring at an increasingly young age and at astronomically high rates. Pornography hijacks the brain's dopamine system. It inhibits judgment, leading to compulsive behavior. It produces unnaturally high, prolonged dopamine levels, which in turn leads to desensitization, and the seeking out of novelty results in an escalation of behavior in which you devolve into more extreme pornographic content in order to achieve that same level of arousal because your brain's dopamine levels have gone out of whack. Also, we see pornography teaches unhealthy sexuality. It depicts violent acts, and it creates sexual scripts built around these violent acts and abuse. And so as people seek out this novel sexuality, get deeper into this violent, aggressive pornography, pornography is creating in them a sexual script which then they take to their own sex lives and commit sexual violence and aggression towards their partners. Pornography is also creating unrealistic expectations with respect to sexuality and beauty, creating negative body image issues in both men and women, and resulting in porn-induced erectile dysfunction in young men, which we've seen skyrocket since the advent of internet pornography. And then also we see the sad situation in which pornography isn't enough, and people go out, seek risky sexual behavior in order to fulfill that novelty that their brain is searching for as a result of their dopamine level and impulse control being inhibited. And that in turn fuels sex trafficking due to the increased demand for sex in the commercial sex industry. So that's a brief summary of the harms of pornography. But now we are at a turning point in our society today. Finally, people across the nation are fighting back. And here at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, we're proud to be a part of that fight. And there's organizations, like I said, across the country. I have the logos of some of them here. This isn't even close to all of them. Heck, I don't even think I got close to half of them shown here. It's really amazing to see people uniting together to fight back against this issue. And I also want to point towards a bit of an anecdotal study. So there are young men and women across the internet who are uniting together and saying, we no longer want pornography to be a part of our life. And many of them are reporting what they claim to be superpowers. And so I have a couple quotes here by Reddit users who talk about their experience giving up pornography and the superpowers that they got from giving up pornography. So one user states, "You can start to enjoy the little things in life again. No longer emotionally numb. Energy levels start to increase big time. Confidence also increases." Another user said, "There's no more brain fog. I'm more happy and friendly, and at the same time, I got disciplined." But then one Reddit user really put these superpowers into perspective. They write, "Superpowers or benefits are not some magical lofty plane you suddenly reach with unbelievable abilities you didn't previously have. The feeling of superpowers is literally just you without pornography." And so what these Reddit users are experiencing is very real. It's their body and their brain going through a dopamine reset. As they give up pornography and their brain starts to readjust to normal, natural levels of dopamine, they begin to enjoy life again. They begin to experience the normal levels of dopamine that before their brain simply shut out as unimportant because it was always searching for that super high artificial pornography dopamine rush. And so now, how can you take action against pornography? So I've split this up into three major categories for those of you looking for ways that you can take action against pornography. First and foremost, for those who are struggling with pornography addiction, or those who know somebody who is struggling with pornography addiction, as I wanted to highlight on the last slide, recovery is possible. And as you give up pornography, your day-to-day life just becomes more and more enjoyable as your brain naturally returns to those natural, normal dopamine reception levels rather than the artificial levels of pornography. And so I want to give a word of hope to all those who are struggling or know somebody who's struggling. Recovery is indeed possible. And we have plenty of resources available for those who are looking for help in overcoming this problem. Like I mentioned, we're facing a new advent in this country in which organizations across the country are fighting back. And we have many of those resources listed on our website. You can go to endsexualexploitation.org/resources to find resources to help you or your loved ones in the battle against pornography. We have resources for men, for women, and for spouses of those struggling with pornography addiction. So definitely check it out. And on top of that, I encourage everyone who is struggling to join a strong community. Like I said at the very beginning, this is a public health issue, and it's not something that can be overcome simply through white knuckling. You really do need a strong community to help back you up and to be there to support you. And thankfully, like I said, there's organizations across the country popping up listed on our resources page to help you find a community to help overcome this problem. For those of you who are parents out there, please, please, please talk to your children in an age-appropriate manner about pornography. Now, there's a great resource out there. It's a book titled Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and it's written by Kristen Jensen, who's over at our friends at Protect Young Minds. Kristen's written a fantastic book that you can read with your child about pornography, and it puts it in the framework of good pictures versus bad pictures, and it encourages your child to come to an adult, to a parent, if they come across pornographic content, whether it be on the internet or somebody shows it to them. And so one of the things that we often hear is parents say, I'm scared about my child, coming across pornography, but I'm afraid if I talk to them about it, they'll just get curious and they'll seek it out. The reality is, in today's pornified culture, children are being exposed to pornography everywhere, whether it's on the internet or it's at school, somebody showing it to them. And so if you talk to your child, the result won't be the curiosity to go seek out pornography. What'll result is, rather than going to Google to find their answers, they'll come and talk to a parent. Like I said, these children are going to be exposed to pornography in some way, shape, or form, even if we do all that we can. And so if that is the case, we need to make sure that their outlet is a safe adult who they can talk to and can help them prevent exposure in the future, rather than allowing them to get caught and ensnared in the trap of pornography. And then also for the parents, please apply internet filters on your internet at home. Like I said, unfortunately in today's society, pornography exposure is so high and it's so common, but we have to do everything we can to prevent it from happening. And the first step towards that is applying an internet filter at home. It'll keep your children just that much safer. Our friends at Covenant Eyes have a great resource and filter available for those of you who are interested. So please check them out. Get internet filters at home. And then last but not least, for the activists out there, which I hope now is all of you, that you've heard about the harms of pornography and the issues that it's causing in society, visit our website, endsexualexploitation.org/projects, where you can learn about all the projects that we have here at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. But there's a couple in particular that I want to point out that may be of interest to you. The first one is Pornography, a Public Health Crisis, that I mentioned at the beginning. Share information with others about the harms of pornography, just like I did with you today. You can find resources on the harms of pornography, including links to all the different studies that I talked about today, on our Pornography, a Public Health Crisis page, which is endsexualexploitation.org/public health. You can also fight back against facilitators of sexual exploitation through our Dirty Dozen list. So each year, we list 12 organizations and companies that in some way facilitate sexual exploitation, and we provide different actions that you can take against these companies and organizations to help fight back against their facilitation of exploitation. So you can check that out at dirtydozenlist.com. And then finally, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are celebrating White Ribbon Against Pornography Week this week. So please visit endsexualexploitation.org/wrap to learn all about our Wrap Week activities and ways that you can get involved in this year's Wrap Week. And finally, one thing I'd like to note is always expose the web of sexual exploitation. As I've tried to highlight today, pornography is not an isolated issue. Pornography is tied in with sexual violence and abuse, sex trafficking and prostitution, and objectification in today's society. And so we must recognize that if we want to combat all forms of sexual exploitation, we must look at the web and the ways in which they're interconnected, and pornography being a part of that. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I am now open to take any questions that you may have. If you'd like to submit a question, you can hit the Q&A button on your control panel and type in any question that you may have.